When the Night Comes Out presents Jump Scares. Today's bite-sized horror is entitled The Race. Written by Bryan W. Alaspa. Narrated and produced by Allie James. The world had moved on. The United States, once the largest and most powerful country on the planet, was now nothing more than warring tribes. The government did not exist. All of those who had hoped for a day when there was little in the way of government got their wish. Clay laughed at the thought. He was just old enough to remember the political debates that had raged in his younger days, with certain candidates promising less involvement by the government. Well, he thought, these days there was no government. And what had happened? The country had devolved into chaos. Most of the population had moved to Mexico and South America, Europe, or Canada. Those who stayed behind had formed what could only be described as tribes. The country was divided like a kind of cake, with various warlords ruling certain segments. Some were benevolent rulers who only killed those who attacked them. More often than not, however, they were vicious killers, little more than gang leaders and gang members who would kill you as soon as spit on you. Whatever their attitude, few of them had patience for the race. Clay clutched at the steering wheel. Around him were 50 other cars and trucks, all of them decked out in armor and weaponry that made recognizing what they really were underneath almost impossible. Some of them were sports cars, and some of them were off-road vehicles, like Clay's Jeep. Some of them were trucks. Still more, at least to Clay's eyes, looked like tanks. Perhaps they were, as military vehicles were not that hard to come by these days. There were fields of abandoned military bases filled with vehicles, and warlords eager to sell them to gain profit and power. "Are you there, Deke?" he said into the earpiece situated in his left ear.
"Still here, Clay,"
said the voice.
"You just asked me if I was here about 5 minutes ago. Nervous?"
"Wouldn't you be?" Clay asked. Deke was safe. What did he care? He was in Toronto, sitting in front of a bank of computers. Those computers tracked the car, its fuel, how well it was running, and tracked where it was. They had to get from this beautiful corner of Maine across the country and to Los Angeles. The first one to make it across won. If the warlords didn't kill you, however, your fellow racers might. It was the race, and it was the most popular sporting event on the planet. Clay glanced nervously at the tiny camera rigged to the rearview mirror. Were they showing him on TV right now? He'd have to be careful about picking his nose. "Relax," Angela said next to him. Clay almost jumped. He had almost forgotten that she was there. Her red hair cascaded down her shoulders, and the maps she needed as navigator were neatly folded and placed into holders around her seat. Before this was over, provided they were still alive, this whole car would be a mess. Her maps would be crinkled and torn. Deke would be the only one who smelled decently. He was allowed to offer advice, keep them abreast of news, and let them know about the car, but not provide any navigational guidance. Their transmissions were monitored to make sure.
2 minutes,
the loudspeaker announced. He needed the money, Clay said. His mother was sick. Back in her apartment in Montreal, she lay dying. He had been a racer once, back in the day when races other than this one had been run. He had a few sponsors. He had a decent car. He had the required fuel in his tank and one fill-up in containers in his back seat. The rest, well, it was all up to him. He looked around. The other drivers looked variously like they were terrified, indifferent, or ready to kill someone. Most of them were killers, and many of them would kill before this race was over. They just couldn't kill any of their fellow drivers until they were out of Maine. That way, you could avoid the start line massacres that had plagued the first races before they enacted that rule. So many miles, he thought. So many miles and so many dangers between here and there. So many things could go wrong. Get off the main road, he thought. Get off the main road and ride through the wilderness. Find food, find water, find fuel, find people to barter with. In an amazing amount of time, the final moments ticked down. The engines turned over, and drivers clutched at their steering wheels and gear shifters. Clay clutched at his. He looked up to check that the machine gun that had been affixed to the roll bar was still there. Nothing had happened to it since he had last checked.
Drivers ready.
Clay clutched the steering wheel tighter and gave the car some gas to rev the engine. He looked over at Angela. She smiled. Nothing seemed to rattle her.
Drivers set.
Clay swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. His eyes flicked to the cars on either side, then to the open road before him. He had never been to Maine before. Nice, he thought, and then nearly laughed. His brain always wandered when he was nervous.
Go.
Clay shifted into drive and stomped on the gas. Around him, engines growled. The sun beat down. Death lay ahead, but so did glory and riches beyond imagining. The Jeep tore off the road. The race had begun. Thanks for listening to When the Night Comes Out Jump Scares. Be sure to like, share, and review. You can binge our first 2 seasons of full-length stories now. Until next time, try to stay safe when the night comes out. Hey guys. We appreciate your continued support, but we also would like to create a community around When the Night Comes Out. A community of horror fiction fans who support us so we can bring you even more stories, more scares, expand what we offer, and maybe even podcast merch. So be sure to visit patreon.com/whenthenightcomesout and become a supporter. Every amount helps. We'll see you next time, When the Night Comes Out.